I was a woman dying from a terminal illness. But to the man I loved, I was nothing. Even when I was alone in a hospital bed, begging for help, he was too busy fooling around with someone else. Julia Lopez, we're still legally married. How could you just leave with someone else? Jason Smith carefully folded the note bearing her handwriting and tucked it into the inner pocket of his jacket. Then he turned and walked away. From that day on, everyone who worked with Jason Smith noticed something had changed. He used to be seen with a different woman every few days. In high society circles, he was considered one of the most notorious playboys. But since it didn't affect the company's image, no one dared to say anything. Now, not only had he become a full-blown workaholic, but even on quiet days, he went home early. Former flings who came to see him were all turned away by his assistant. People began to wonder what kind of woman had managed to tie down a man like that. But Jason Smith hid her too well. No one had ever seen her. General Manager Jason, the acquisition of the Mara Corporation after 6 months has been fully completed, Carlos Garcia said, placing the report on his desk and turning to leave. These days, Jason Smith's face was cold as stone. Even the slightest frown carried an air of intimidation. Carlos Garcia didn't dare act as casually as before. Carlos Garcia, Jason Smith suddenly spoke. You don't seem to have much to say to me anymore. Carlos Garcia smiled faintly. General Manager Jason, we're just colleagues, after all. If you need anything, just say the word. I still remember when I invited you over for dumplings. When did that all change? Jason Smith wasn't really asking. It sounded more like he was talking to himself. His words made Carlos Garcia's nose sting. Yes, they used to be more like friends. But something had changed. They both knew why, because a woman had left. Without her, no one at home cared for Jason Smith's closest aide. Without her, that house was no longer a home, just a shell without warmth. If you're not busy, let's talk a bit, Jason Smith said. Sure. Carlos Garcia didn't stand on ceremony. He sat down across from him. Jason Smith handed him a cigarette and lit one for himself. His face was still expressionless, but there was a trace of hope in his eyes. Tell me about her. If I remember right, you two got along. Carlos Garcia froze, half expecting this was the start of some quiet punishment. He looked up at Jason Smith, but the man's face held nothing but calm. Don't worry, Jason Smith said. I just want to hear more about her. I didn't treasure her when she was with me. Now that she's gone, I'm stuck asking you for her stories. Isn't that pathetic? He let out a laugh. General Manager Jason, Carlos Garcia quickly handed him a glass of water as the man started coughing on his smoke. It's nothing, Jason Smith waved him off. Just talk to me, will you? He placed the glass down. He knew everything he did now was too little, too late, but he still wanted to know. Those 3 years he was messing around out there, how did Julia Lopez survive? Carlos Garcia had been with them since their startup days. During those wild years, Julia Lopez often called him, asking about Jason Smith. Carlos Garcia had never told her the truth, but Julia Lopez, smart and intuitive, must have seen through it. She just chose not to expose the lie. Now that Jason Smith was asking, Carlos Garcia had no reason to hold back. In fact, he'd wanted to speak up for a long time, but without the chance, he had buried it all deep inside. To be honest, I didn't see Madame Julia often, just here and there. But each time, she always seemed so alone. You know, her place was small, but to mate looked so empty. Yeah, empty. Jason Smith's face twisted with bitterness. Of course it was. Julia Lopez was such a small figure, alone in that apartment, day in and day out. She must have felt so lonely. Northern winters are already freezing. And me? What kind of person leaves her in that cold, silent place, pretending she doesn't exist? I remember once, Carlos Garcia said, his voice low. Madame Julia asked me, what is he so busy with all the time? I didn't know what else to say, so I told her you were working hard for her, General Manager Jason. Even now, I feel guilty for that lie. His nose stung with emotion. How could someone as gentle as her be forced to suffer like that? Jason Smith didn't get angry. He looked at Carlos Garcia, and for once, there was softness in his expression. Maybe in that quiet conversation, their relationship felt like it had returned to the old days. And that gave him a sliver of comfort. I know what everyone thinks of me, he said, cold, heartless, a player without shame. And you know what, Carlos Garcia? I don't blame them. I regret it too. But what's the use of regret? He added. No amount of it will bring Julia Lopez back. It's been 6 months, Jason Smith murmured. She's been gone 6 months. And yet, it still feels like she never left. Like she's right here. General Manager Jason, I'm sorry for your loss, Carlos Garcia offered quietly. Jason Smith stared at the tip of his cigarette burning silently. But her ashes aren't even with me. Tell me, what kind of husband does that make me? Carlos Garcia had no answer. He didn't even know what to say. Look into Tony Kamel, Jason Smith said, flicking the ash. Find out his connection to the Tony family in South City. I don't want Julia Lopez resting in someone else's hands. South City's Tony family? Carlos Garcia blinked, surprised. Then he added, General Manager Jason, we just took over Maricorp, picking a fight with Tony's group now. That could damage the company. Doesn't matter, Jason Smith cut him off. If I could trade everything I have just to bring Julia back, it'd be worth it. He'd held back long enough. After Carlos Garcia left, Jason Smith took out the letter the villa servant had given him. 6 months later, the edges were still crisp. Clearly, someone had taken care of it. Jason Smith opened it carefully. Just a few words, yet no matter how many times he read them, it would never feel like enough. Julia, he whispered, forgive me. I was selfish, but I can't not bring you home. I need you with me. Only now did he understand without Julia Lopez. Who was he? Just a walking corpse in expensive clothes, hollow inside. No one would ever make him feel grounded like she did. So what if he had money? So what if he had people around him? Without Julia Lopez, it all meant nothing. It was late when Jason Smith left the office. The receptionist smiled shyly. General Manager Jason, heading home already? Yeah, he replied, heading out without another word. The receptionist blinked, confused. She'd just returned from leave, and the once carefree, flirtatious boss now felt like a completely different man. Jason Smith drove straight home, but the moment he saw who was standing by his door, his breath hitched. Jason, the woman said, and with that, the illusion shattered. Jason Smith's voice turned cold. Latina Mera, you've got some nerve showing up here. Want me to remind you how that staircase felt? No, Jason. Listen to me, Latina Mera stammered. She could feel the chill in his tone, but thinking of her family's situation, she bit her lip and said, I'm here to beg you. Can't you spare Maricorp? The hallway was bright, but it didn't warm the air around Jason Smith. Latina Mera clenched her hands nervously, gesture that reminded Jason Smith, involuntarily, of Julia Lopez. His heart softened just a little. Fine, he said. Latina Mera's eyes lit up. She took a step forward only for him to add, as long as you can bring Julia Lopez back to me, alive. If you can do that, forget Maricorp. I'll hand over my entire company. Jason Smith stepped closer, eyes sharp. Tell me, Latina American, you do that. You want Maricorp. I want Julia Lopez. She's not coming back, Latina Mera screamed, breaking down. Julia Lopez is dead. Do you not get that? She had wanted to stand beside Jason Smith forever as Mrs. Jason. She knew how much of that was about power and how much was about him. Deep down, she knew the answer all too well. But watching this man lose his mind over a woman who was already gone, Latina Mera couldn't control herself. Leave, Latina Mera. Don't ever come back, Jason Smith said coldly. He'd already told Carlos Garcia not to push things too far. The Mera family would survive, just not with the same wealth and power as before. It was his way of compensating for the child Latina Mera had once carried, a way to give Julia Lopez peace in the afterlife. As for what else Carlos Garcia had uncovered, Jason Smith couldn't even bother to investigate. In the end, he had given Latina Mera those illusions. He'd let her ambitions spiral out of control. Latina Mera gave him one last glance, said nothing, and turned to leave. Wait, Jason Smith called after her. Latina Mera turned around with a glimmer of hope only for her smile to freeze at his next words. Give me back my necklace. Jason Smith didn't bother asking how she got it. She must have stolen it. What disgusted him more was himself for not caring when he first realized it was missing. He thought the necklace didn't matter. Julia Lopez was still there with him. Wasn't that enough? Julia Lopez was supposed to be the one who'd never leave, and he had lost her to his own arrogance and blindness. Latina Mara's face turned ghostly pale. Under Jason Smith's knowing gaze, she felt more humiliated than when the wedding had been called off. She ripped the necklace off and threw it at him, seething with hatred. How could Jason Smith treasure such a worthless trinket, just like how he obsessed over Julia Lopez? That woman didn't have her looks, her figure, or her background. Jason Smith caught the necklace. It burned against his fingers. His chest tightened, like a blade had stabbed straight through it. The metal still carried another woman's warmth. Seeing how disgusted he looked, like he couldn't touch it, but also couldn't let it go, Latina Mara sneered. What? Does it feel dirty now? I'm the one who's dirty, Jason Smith said, gripping the necklace tighter. Latina Mara's face flushed red. She turned and ran away. One day, she vowed, he would regret not seeing her worth. Jason Smith finally opened the door. Their wedding photo now hung in the most prominent spot in the living room, visible the moment you stepped inside. Before leaving that morning, he'd left the lights on, pretending someone was still here, waiting for him to come home, pretending the place wasn't so cold, pretending Julia Lopez was still here. With a smile, he called out, "Honey, I'm home." Julia Lopez appeared, smiling sweetly in her apron. "I made your favorite braised fish and tomato beef stew. You've been drinking again, haven't you?" She wrinkled her nose and held out a cup. "I made you some liver tea." For a moment, everything felt like before he strayed. His eyes lit up. He reached out to hold her. But all he caught was empty air. Julia Lopez's figure vanished like smoke. Jason Smith stood frozen. A chill spread from his soles to the top of his head. What used to be ordinary, everyday life was now a loss he could never undo, a regret he would chase until the end of time.